The air on Cryos burned with each breath, despite the planet's bitter cold. Sergeant Elias Vance tasted blood and sulfur as his lungs heaved. All around him, the remnants of the 42nd Terran Battalion stumbled through the ruins of what had once been a border settlement. The Xyloian artillery had found their range hours ago, and now the ground shook with mechanical precision as silver-blue explosions rained from the sky. "Keep moving," Lieutenant Rurik shouted over the tactical channel, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "They'll overrun our position in minutes." Elias had seen too many retreats like this one. 5 years of conflict with the Xyloian Empire had taught him the rhythm of defeat, the desperate scramble, the silent counting of missing comrades, the cold calculation of how many would survive the night. He leapt over a collapsed wall, boots skidding on the frost-slick rubble as he navigated the skeletal remains of the outpost. Another blast rocked the earth behind him, closer this time. Through the settling dust and smoke, Elias caught a flash of movement that didn't match the hurried silhouettes of his fellow soldiers. He paused, squinting through his visor's battle damage display. There, in the hollow shell of what might have been a habitation module, something small shifted in the shadows. "Vance, move your ass," Private Torres called from 20 meters ahead. Elias signaled acknowledgement, but approached the structure cautiously, rifle raised. Protocol was clear: any Xyloian presence, combatant or otherwise, was to be neutralized or abandoned. The war had long since erased the luxury of distinctions. When he reached the threshold of the ruined building, Elias swept his targeting laser across the interior debris. That's when he saw it. Not it, he realized, but a small, huddled form with unmistakably Xyloian features. A child. The young Xyloian couldn't have been more than the equivalent of a 7-year-old human. Silver-blue skin caught the fading light, almost translucent against the darkness. Large violet eyes, characteristic of the species, blinked up at him in naked terror. The child's delicate 6-fingered hands clutched a tattered piece of fabric that might have been a comfort item or toy. "Sergeant, we've got enemy signatures closing fast. What's your status?" Lieutenant Roarik's voice crackled through his comms. Elias's finger hovered near the trigger of his rifle. The standing order was absolute. No exceptions, no hesitations. The child made no sound, but those violet eyes seemed to see through his helmet, through the hardened shell of the soldier he'd become. "I'm..." Elias began, but never finished the sentence. The warning came as a high-pitched whine that every veteran infantryman recognized instinctively. Xyloian plasma mortar. Incoming. Close. Elias didn't remember dropping his rifle. He didn't remember the decision. One moment he stood frozen in the doorway, the next he had lunged forward, throwing himself over the small Xyloian child as the world erupted into blinding light and searing heat. The blast caught the edge of the structure, collapsing what remained of its outer wall. Elias felt the superheated air scorch through gaps in his armor, felt shrapnel ping and puncture the reinforced plates across his back. Pain lanced through his left side, but he remained conscious, his body curled protectively around the tiny alien form beneath him. As the ringing in his ears subsided, Elias realized the child was alive, trembling violently against his chest plate. By some miracle, his armor had absorbed the worst of the blast. "Vance. Report. Damn it." Roarik's voice seemed distant now. Elias struggled to his knees, still shielding the child. "I'm here," he managed, his voice rough. "Then get moving. We're falling back to extraction point Delta." Elias looked down at the Xyloian child who stared back with an unreadable expression. Fear, yes, but something else. Recognition, perhaps. In that moment, Elias made a decision that would change his life, and though he couldn't know it yet, potentially alter the course of the war itself. He detached his emergency supply pack, creating a makeshift carrier, and carefully placed the child inside. The young Xyloian didn't resist either from shock or understanding. "I'm coming," Elias replied, securing the pack to his front where he could protect it with his arms. Had to retrieve critical intel. He moved as quickly as his injured side would allow, catching up to the rear of the retreating column within minutes. Private Torres gave him a questioning look, eyes dropping to the pack strapped awkwardly across Elias's chest. "What you got there, Sarge?" "Nothing that concerns you," Elias grunted, pushing past. They marched through the growing darkness, the temperature plummeting as Cryos's weak sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. The artillery had stopped, which worried Elias more than comforted him. It meant the Xyloian ground forces were preparing to sweep the area. When they reached a narrow ravine that offered temporary shelter, Lieutenant Rurik called a brief halt to assess casualties and regroup. Elias hung back, checking that the child was still alive. The little Xyloian blinked up at him, shivering but alert. "You're going to be okay," Elias whispered, though he doubted the child understood. He offered a ration pack, unsure if it would be compatible with Xyloian biology, but the child turned away. "Sergeant Vance." Roarik's voice cut through the frigid air. The lieutenant stood a few paces away, his helmet removed, revealing a face haggard with exhaustion and suspicion. "What are you carrying?" For a moment, Elias considered lying again, but he knew the ruse wouldn't hold. Instead, he opened the pack just enough for Rurik to see its occupant. The lieutenant's face hardened to stone. "Have you lost your mind?" "It's a child," Elias stated simply. "It's the enemy." Roarik's hand moved to his sidearm. "You know the standing order." By now, the exchange had drawn attention. Several soldiers gathered, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock as they realized what Elias had brought with him. "Jesus, Sarge," Torres breathed. "That's Zio." Elias straightened, wincing at the pain in his side. "I'm aware of what it is." Rurik stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You've compromised this entire unit. That thing could have a tracker. Hell, it could be a walking bomb for all we know." "She's a child," Elias repeated, emphasizing the pronoun. "And she's defenseless." "Leave it, Sergeant. That's an order." Elias looked at the faces of his comrades, men and women he'd fought alongside for years. He saw fear, disgust, and in a few, conflict that mirrored his own. But he also recognized resolve. If he refused, this would end badly. "With respect, sir, I can't do that." Roarik's hand closed around his pistol. "I won't ask again." The moment stretched, taut with possibility. Then Elias made his second life-altering decision of the day. "I understand." He took a step back. "I'll remove myself from the unit. You continue to extraction. I'll find my own way." "That's desertion," Rurik said, but there was a hint of relief in his voice. Executing a decorated sergeant would have weighed heavily, even with the justification. "Call it what you want." Elias checked his ammunition and the emergency beacon in his wrist computer. "Just know I'm doing this because some lines shouldn't be crossed, even in war. You're throwing away your career, your life, for a Zio?" Torres asked, genuinely bewildered. Elias sealed the pack, securing the child who had remained silently observant throughout the confrontation. "Maybe I'm remembering what we're supposed to be fighting for." No one moved to stop him as he turned and walked away from the ravine, heading east where the terrain offered more cover. Behind him, he heard Rurik order the unit to move out in the opposite direction, no doubt hoping to distance themselves from whatever fate awaited the sergeant and his alien charge. Night had fully descended on Cryos, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that even Terran combat armor struggled to mitigate. Elias trudged through knee-deep snow, following a frozen stream bed that wound between jagged rock formations. The child had fallen into an uneasy sleep which concerned him. He knew little about Xyloian physiology, but the dropping temperature couldn't be good for the small being. After an hour's march, Elias spotted what he'd been searching for, a deep recess in the cliff face, partially obscured by ice formations. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide shelter from both the elements and scanning technology. Inside, he carefully set down his pack and extracted the still sleeping child. Elias. To his surprise, the child mimicked the gesture, touching her own chest. Leah, she attempted the sounds, clearly difficult with her different vocal structure. And she pointed at him. Elias. Elias couldn't help but smile. Quick learner. That's good. He offered a ration bar again, breaking off a small piece. This time, Lyra cautiously accepted it, sniffing the morsel before taking a tiny bite. She didn't seem to enjoy the taste, but swallowed anyway, hunger apparently overcoming any reservations. As Lyra ate, Elias considered their situation. He was effectively AWOL, possibly labeled a deserter or even a traitor. The standard emergency beacon would only bring Terran forces down on them, which would be disastrous for Lyra. And wandering the frozen wastes of Cryos would mean certain death for both of them within days. They needed a long-term shelter, supplies, and eventually a plan for getting off-planet. The nearest civilian settlement was at least 100 kilometers away. And even if they reached it, appearing with a Xyloian child would create more problems than it solved. Elias was still contemplating their limited options when Lyra suddenly tensed, her head snapping toward the cave entrance. A moment later, Elias heard it too, the low hum of Xyloian anti-gravity engines. A patrol, or worse, a search party. He quickly doused the thermal unit and retreated deeper into the cave, cradling Lyra against his chest. The child remained perfectly silent, seemingly understanding the need for stealth. Together, they huddled in the darkness as the sound grew louder, then gradually faded as the craft passed overhead. That was close, Elias whispered. But they'll be back with ground teams. Lyra tugged at his armor and pointed deeper into the cave. Elias hesitated, then nodded. Worth a look, I suppose. Activating his helmet's night vision, Elias discovered that what he'd taken for a simple recess actually extended into a complex tunnel system. Some passages were natural, while others showed signs of deliberate excavation, perhaps an abandoned mining operation or an unfinished military installation. They ventured cautiously into the network, Elias marking their path with infrared tags visible only through his helmet display. After about a kilometer of winding tunnels, they emerged into a larger chamber that took Elias's breath away. The space had clearly been developed as a forward operating base, though whether by Terran or Xyloian forces, he couldn't immediately tell. Power systems lay dormant but intact. Supply crates lined one wall. Most importantly, the chamber was insulated from the bitter cold of the surface. Jackpot, Elias murmured, setting Lyra down to investigate their find. Further exploration revealed that the base had been Terran, an intelligence outpost based on the communications equipment, but had been abandoned in haste during an earlier phase of the conflict. Many supplies remained, including rations, medical equipment, and even a functional environmental control system once Elias managed to activate the emergency power cells. As warmth flooded the chamber, Lyra began to explore on her own, touching equipment with curious fingers and examining the human-designed furnishings. Elias watched her, struck by how ordinary her behavior seemed, just a child discovering a new place, despite being thousands of light years from her home and species. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Elias tended his wound, which healed slowly but cleanly thanks to the medical supplies. He rigged an early warning system at the cave entrance using motion sensors from the base's security equipment. Most importantly, he began teaching Lyra basic Terran standard words while she in turn introduced him to the melodic, complex sounds of the Xyloian language. Progress was remarkable. By the 5th day, they could communicate simple needs and concepts. Elias learned that Lyra had become separated from her caretaker during the Terran artillery bombardment that had preceded the Xyloian counterattack. She didn't seem to understand what had happened to her home or why she couldn't return, which spared Elias the impossible task of explaining the war to a child. On the 7th day, the warning system alerted them to movement near the cave entrance. Elias accessed the camera feed to find a Terran patrol of 4 soldiers methodically sweeping the area. Their markings identified them as members of the 31st Reconnaissance Division, known for their thoroughness and their standing orders to pursue deserters with the same vigor as enemy combatants. "We have to move deeper," he told Lyra, who understood enough to quickly gather the few possessions she had claimed as her own, a small collection of crystalline rocks and a maintenance manual whose diagrams had fascinated her. They retreated to a secondary chamber Elias had prepared for just such an eventuality, a narrow space accessible only through a maintenance shaft that would be difficult to spot without detailed scans. There they waited in silence as the patrol entered the main chamber. Through the thin metal grating, Elias could hear their voices clearly. "Definitely been occupied recently," a female soldier said. "Thermal traces all over." "Vance's beacon went dark in this area," another replied. "Command wants him brought in for questioning about the Zio kid that Intel says he claimed to have recovered. Brass thinks he might have gone native." Laughter followed. "5 years on the front will do that to you." Lyra pressed against Elias's side, trembling slightly. Whether she understood the words or merely sensed the danger, Elias couldn't tell. He placed a protective arm around her shoulders. The search continued for hours, but eventually the patrol departed, apparently satisfied that the base was now abandoned. Still, Elias waited another full day before emerging from their hiding place, wary of surveillance devices the soldiers might have left behind. When they finally returned to the main chamber, Elias found their supplies largely untouched. The patrol had been looking for people, not provisions. Still, it was clear that their sanctuary had been compromised. "We need to find somewhere else," he told Lyra, who nodded solemnly. That night, as they prepared to rest before attempting to find a new shelter, Elias noticed Lyra staring intently at a small device she had discovered in one of the supply crates. It was a standard Terran translation module, damaged but partially functional. "That doesn't work anymore," Elias explained. But Lyra continued to examine it, turning it over in her six-fingered hands. Suddenly, the device emitted a soft chime. Lyra looked up at Elias, her expression urgent. She held the device to her lips and spoke a sequence of Xyloian words. The translator sputtered, then produced a halting electronic voice. Asterisk, mother, searching, mother, important. Asterisk. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Your mother is looking for you." Lyra nodded vigorously, attempting more words that the damaged translator couldn't process. But the message was clear enough. Someone was specifically searching for Lyra, not just random Xyloian patrols. "Who is your mother?" Elias asked, though he knew the question was too complex for their limited communication tools. Lyra seemed to understand his confusion. She pointed to the translator, then made a series of gestures, hands spread wide, then brought together in what looked like a command gesture, followed by a motion that mimicked firing weapons. A cold realization settled in Elias's stomach. "Your mother is a commander? A military leader?" Lyra nodded again, her expression a mix of pride and concern. That night, as Lyra slept, Elias contemplated this new information. If the child's mother was a Xyloian commander, the search for her would be relentless. Resources would be poured into the effort. The danger had just increased exponentially. But so too had the opportunity. A high-ranking Xyloian officer's child would be valuable. Not as a hostage or bargaining chip, which was a line Elias refused to cross, but perhaps as a bridge, if he could somehow safely return Lyra to her mother under the right circumstances. Elias pushed the thought away. For now, survival was the priority. Everything else was a distant second. The following morning, they gathered essential supplies and abandoned the base, heading deeper into the tunnel network. According to the fragmentary maps Elias had discovered, the system extended for dozens of kilometers with multiple surface access points. If they could reach the eastern terminus, they might find themselves closer to neutral territory where independent traders sometimes docked. Despite the conflict, their journey through the tunnels was slow, hampered by cave-ins and the need to constantly verify their route against the incomplete maps. Lyra proved surprisingly resilient, keeping pace with Elias and even identifying safe passages when the tunnels branched confusingly. On the third day of their underground trek, they encountered their first serious obstacle, a massive collapse that blocked their primary route. As they searched for an alternative path, Elias became aware of a subtle vibration in the stone floor. He froze, signaling Lyra to remain still. The vibration grew stronger, resolving into rhythmic impacts. Footsteps, many of them, approaching from a side tunnel they had passed earlier. "Hide," Elias whispered, guiding Lyra into a narrow fissure in the wall. He positioned himself in front of it, rifle ready, but hoping to avoid a confrontation that would inevitably end badly for them. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by the distinctive hum of Xyloian energy weapons. Elias's grip tightened on his rifle. If they were discovered, he would have seconds at most to make a decision. Fight or surrender? Neither option promised survival. The patrol emerged from the side tunnel, for Xyloian soldiers in full combat armor, their silver-blue exoskeletons gleaming in the dim emergency lighting of the passageway. They moved with precision, scanning methodically with handheld devices. Unlike the Terran patrol, they seemed to know exactly what they were looking for. Elias held his breath as the lead soldier turned in their direction. The scanning device in the alien's hand emitted a soft tone. The soldier took another step forward, then stopped, head tilted as if listening to a communication through an internal system. After what seemed an eternity, the patrol leader made a swift gesture, and the unit retreated back the way they had come, their footsteps fading into the distance. Elias exhaled slowly, but the relief was short-lived. The Xyloians hadn't found them through blind luck. They were following a trail, methodically sweeping the tunnel system. And they had technology specifically calibrated to detect their quarry. "We need to move faster," he told Lyra, who nodded, her violet eyes wide with fear. Not of him, he realized, but for him. They pushed on, taking riskier routes to make up time. Twice more, they narrowly avoided Xyloian patrols, each time coming closer to discovery. It became clear that they were being herded, the search pattern closing in around them with each passing hour. By the seventh day underground, they had reached a vast natural cavern near the eastern terminus of the tunnel system. According to Elias's map, a surface access point lay less than a kilometer ahead. But as they entered the cavern, Elias's tactical instinct screamed a warning. The space was too open, too exposed. A perfect place for an ambush. "Wait," he whispered to Lyra, scanning the stalagmite formations that dotted the cavern floor. Something wasn't right about their arrangement. Too regular, too convenient as cover. His suspicion was confirmed a moment later when a brilliant light flooded the cavern, blinding him temporarily despite his visor's automatic compensation. When his vision cleared, Elias found himself surrounded by at least a dozen Xyloian soldiers, weapons trained on him from multiple positions. "Don't move," he told Lyra, who stood frozen beside him. "It's going to be okay." From behind a particularly large formation stepped a Xyloian unlike any Elias had seen before. Taller than the others, with more elaborate armor that seemed ceremonial as well as functional, the helmet retracted, revealing a face that shared Lyra's delicate features, but hardened by experience and authority. Elias knew without being told that he was looking at Lyra's mother. The Xyloian commander. "Elias," Lyra whispered, confirming his thought with a single word. "Mother." The commander approached slowly, her violet eyes, so like her daughter's, fixed on Elias with an intensity that made him want to step back. But he held his ground, keeping his rifle lowered but not relinquishing it. When she spoke, her voice was surprisingly melodic, though the words were unintelligible to Elias. She carried no visible translation device, apparently not expecting or caring about communication with a human. But then Lyra stepped forward, speaking rapidly in their shared language. The commander's expression shifted subtly. Surprise, perhaps even shock. After Lyra finished, the commander turned to one of her officers who produced a small device similar to but more advanced than the damaged translator Lyra had found. The commander spoke into it and crisp Terran standard emerged. My daughter says you shielded her from death. That you have protected her at great cost to yourself. Elias nodded cautiously. She was just a child in danger. I did what anyone would do. The translation device conveyed his words. The commander's expression remained unreadable, but Elias sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The weapons trained on him didn't lower, but the fingers on triggers seemed less tense. I am General Kyasha, the commander said through the translator. You know what my daughter is to me, but you cannot know what you have done by saving her. Elias remained silent, uncertain how to respond. Kyasha continued, your people have been given to understand that we seek only conquest, that we are without honor or compassion. This serves those who profit from war. She took another step closer. Yet you, a lone soldier, acted with more honor toward my blood than your entire military infrastructure. This complicates matters. Lyra moved to stand between them, looking from Elias to her mother and back again, clearly distressed by the tension. Kyasha's expression softened momentarily as she regarded her daughter, then hardened again as she returned her attention to Elias. You will come with us, she stated. It wasn't a request. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. What happens to me if I do? The question was translated and something almost like amusement flickered across Kyasha's face. If I wished you dead, human, you would not be speaking now. That much was undoubtedly true. Elias glanced at Lyra, who looked up at him pleadingly. He had protected her for weeks now. Ironically, she seemed intent on protecting him. All right, he said finally, lowering his weapon completely. I'll come. One of the Xyloian soldiers stepped forward to take his rifle while another approached with what appeared to be restraints. Kyasha made a sharp gesture, stopping the second soldier. She spoke in their language, her tone carrying unmistakable authority. The soldiers withdrew, though they maintained their vigilant posture. Kyasha turned back to Elias. You will not be bound, the translator conveyed. That would dishonor what you have done. But know that escape is impossible, and any hostile action will be met with immediate force. With that, she turned and strode toward the far end of the cavern, where Elias now noticed an entrance to what appeared to be a transport vessel embedded in the cave wall. Lyra took his hand, tugging him gently to follow. The surrounding soldiers formed an escort that made it clear he had only one direction to go. The interior of the Xyloian vessel was unlike anything Elias had seen in his years of combat. Terran intelligence had only fragmentary information about Xyloian ship design, most of it gathered from the wreckage of destroyed craft. To see one intact from the inside would have been the intelligence coup of the decade under different circumstances. But Elias had more immediate concerns than military intelligence. As they moved through corridors of a material that seemed to shift between solid and translucent, he tried to memorize their path while assessing potential threats. The Xyloian soldiers maintained a professional distance, neither threatening nor communicative. Lyra stayed close to him, occasionally offering what he took to be reassurances in her language. Her presence beside him rather than with her mother was noteworthy. Kyasha led the procession, but glanced back frequently, her gaze lingering on the strange pair they made, a human soldier and a Xyloian child, hands linked like longtime companions. Eventually, they reached what appeared to be a command center. Kyasha dismissed the escort with a gesture, leaving only herself, Elias, Lyra, and two senior officers who positioned themselves near the exits. Through the translator, Kyasha addressed him directly. You are Sergeant Elias Vance of the Terran 42nd Battalion. Your record shows 17 confirmed engagements against our forces. You have killed many of my people. It wasn't a question, so Elias didn't respond. He noted, however, that they had detailed information about him specifically, not just his unit. Yet you risked everything to save one Xyloian child. Kyasha continued. Why? Elias considered his answer carefully. Because some lines shouldn't be crossed, even in war. She was innocent, defenseless. I couldn't just leave her to die. As the translation finished, Kyasha studied him with those penetrating violet eyes. Many of your kind speak of honor while abandoning it when convenient. You acted on yours at great personal cost. She gestured toward Lyra. My daughter tells me you cared for her, protected her, taught her your language, all while hiding from both our forces and your own. Is this accurate? Yes, Elias confirmed. Though she taught me as much as I taught her. This response seemed to interest Kyasha. What did she teach you, Sergeant Vance? Elias looked down at Lyra, who watched the exchange intently. That maybe this war isn't as simple as we've been told. That there might be more to your people than just an enemy to fight. A subtle change came over Kyasha's posture, a relaxing of tension perhaps, or a reassessment. Indeed. She moved to a console and activated a display that filled the center of the room with a three-dimensional star map. You know little of why we fight, just as most of my people know little of your true nature. This serves the purposes of those who orchestrate conflict. The map zoomed in on Cryos and the surrounding sector. This region contains resources critical to both our species, but there is no natural reason for us to be enemies. In many ways, we are compatible. The word choice struck Elias as odd. Compatible? Kyasha nodded. Your actions toward my daughter demonstrated this. When faced with an ethical choice between duty and compassion, you chose compassion. This is a value we share, though your military command would have you believe otherwise about us. She deactivated the map and turned her full attention to Elias. I now face a similar choice. By our customs, you have created a blood debt. You preserved my lineage at risk to your own life. This cannot be ignored. Elias shifted uncomfortably. I don't want anything in return. I just want Lyra to be safe. Lyra, Kyasha repeated the name, sounding strange in her accent. The name you gave her. She has told me of it. She approached until she stood directly before Elias, close enough that he could see the fine, almost iridescent patterns in her silver-blue skin. But it is not a matter of what you want, Sergeant Vance. It is a matter of what our laws and traditions demand. With ceremonial precision, Kyasha raised her right hand, palm outward, displaying an intricate pattern of what might have been tattoos or natural markings across her palm and fingers. By the ancient rights of the Xyloian people, I claim you as blood guardian to my house. Your life is now bound to ours. Your honor to our honor, your fate to our fate. The translator conveyed the words, but Elias sensed that something was lost: cultural context, nuance, significance. I don't understand. You are claimed, Kyasha stated simply. In saving my daughter, you have become part of our family structure. Not as property or prisoner, but as, the closest word in your language might be guardian or protector, one who has proven worthy of preserving our bloodline. Elias struggled to process the implications. You're saying I'm, what? Adopted? A sound emerged from Kyasha that the translator didn't convert, but Elias recognized as laughter, short and controlled, but genuine. It is more complex than that, but the concept has similarities. You are bound to us now, particularly to Lyra, whom you saved. Among our people, such bonds are sacred and inviolable, transcending even the commands of the empire itself. Lyra, who had been following the conversation through both languages, suddenly spoke up, addressing her mother in rapid Xyloian. Kyasha listened, then responded with what appeared to be a question. Lyra answered immediately, gesturing emphatically toward Elias. Finally, Kyasha nodded and turned back to him. My daughter believes you will not accept this claiming willingly. She fears you will see it as captivity rather than honor. Elias looked between them, feeling caught in currents he couldn't navigate. I'm a Terran soldier. I have duties, responsibilities. To an army that now brands you a deserter? Kyasha interrupted. To commanders who ordered you to abandon a child to death. Those duties were severed the moment you chose compassion over blind obedience. The truth of her words stung. Elias had no illusions about his status with the Terran military. Now, best case scenario, he'd face court-martial and dishonorable discharge. Worst case, summary execution as a traitor. Still, the notion of being claimed by a Xyloian commander struck him as utterly surreal. What exactly would this mean, practically speaking? What would be expected of me? Kyasha considered her response carefully. You would remain at Lyra's side as her primary guardian. You would reside within my household. You would be afforded the respect and privileges of a blood-bound protector, though many of my people would view you with suspicion initially. She paused, then added, you would not be asked to fight against your former comrades or betray Terran secrets. The bond transcends political and military allegiances, but neither would you be permitted to return to your former life. The claiming is permanent. Elias felt trapped, not by physical restraints but by impossible choices. And if I refuse? Something hardened in Kyasha's expression. There is no refusal in our tradition. The blood debt exists regardless of your acceptance. However, she continued, her voice softening slightly, I understand this is foreign to you. You'll be given time to adjust to your new reality. Resistance would only bring pain to Lyra, who has already formed a bond with you that our people consider sacred. Lyra moved closer to Elias, taking his hand again. The gesture wasn't lost on Kyasha, whose expression shifted subtly. Your choice is not whether to accept the claiming, she said. Your choice is whether to embrace it with honor or resist it futilely. One path leads to respect and purpose. The other. She left the statement unfinished, but the implication was clear. Elias looked down at Lyra, whose violet eyes pleaded silently. Then back to Kyasha, who stood imperious yet somehow vulnerable in her concern for her daughter. I need time to think, he said finally. Kyasha nodded. You will be given quarters appropriate to your status. Lyra will remain with you for now, as the bond between you is already established. We will speak again when we reach our destination, which is the Xyloian command vessel Stellaris, my flagship. With that, the audience was concluded. The officers returned to escort Elias and Lyra through more winding corridors until they reached a chamber that, while clearly designed for Xyloian physiology, had been hastily adapted for human comfort. A Terran-style sleeping platform had been installed alongside the more alien furnishings. Food dispensers contained labeled options compatible with human biology. As the door sealed behind them, Elias sank onto the bed, the full weight of his situation finally crashing down upon him. Lyra watched him with concern, then climbed up beside him. Elias, sad? She asked in her improving Terran standard. Not sad, he replied. Just overwhelmed. A lot of changes very quickly. Lyra nodded solemnly as if she understood perfectly, which Elias realized she probably did. Her life had been completely upended too. First by separation from her mother during the battle, then by the weeks spent hiding with a strange alien. Mother, good, Lyra offered hesitantly. Strong, but fair. Elias smiled despite himself. I hope you're right. The journey to the Stellaris took 3 days, during which Elias and Lyra remained largely confined to their quarters. Meals were delivered regularly, and Lyra continued her rapid acquisition of Terran standard while Elias struggled with the more complex phonetics of the Xyloian language. They were visited periodically by medical officers who examined them both with technology far beyond Terran capabilities, though their purpose remained unclear to Elias. On the second day, a uniformed Xyloian, whom Elias took to be an officer, brought a data tablet containing historical and cultural information translated into Terran standard. The material focused heavily on Xyloian concepts of honor, blood debt, and family structure, clearly intended to help Elias understand his new position. What emerged from his reading was a society far more complex and nuanced than the monolithic enemy portrayed in Terran military briefings. The Xyloian social structure was built around extended family units bound by complex obligations of honor and protection. Blood guardians, the role Elias had unwittingly assumed, occupied a special place in this hierarchy, neither family nor servant, but something uniquely respected. Most intriguing was a section on previous contact between humans and Xyloians before the current conflict. There had been peaceful exchanges, trade agreements, even cultural missions between the species. The descent into war was portrayed as the result of resource competition manipulated by certain factions on both sides, rather than inevitable conflict between incompatible species. By the time they docked with the Stellaris, Elias had more questions than answers, but also a glimmer of understanding about his situation. He was not simply a prisoner with a fancy title. He had inadvertently placed himself within the Xyloian social fabric in a way that had significant meaning. The Stellaris itself was a revelation, a vessel the size of a small city with architecture that blended utilitarian military function with striking aesthetic elements. Vast chambers opened to interior garden spaces where plant life from the Xyloian home world created alien landscapes. Thousands of crew members moved with purpose through wide corridors, many stopping to stare at the human walking freely among them with their general's daughter. Kyasha had arranged quarters for them in what Elias gathered was the command section of the vessel, not far from her own. The space was larger than their transit accommodations, with separate sleeping areas for Elias and Lyra, though connected by a common living space. The furnishings showed more attention to human ergonomics, suggesting specific preparations had been made for his arrival. "Your belongings have been examined and returned," the Xyloian attendant explained through a translator. He indicated Elias's armor and equipment, cleaned and repaired, stored in a recessed compartment. "General Kyasha requests your presence in the command center when you have settled." Elias nodded, noting that while his armor and personal effects had been returned, his weapons remained conspicuously absent. Trust only extended so far. After refreshing himself in facilities that had clearly been adapted for human use, Elias was escorted to the command center, with Lyra insisting on accompanying him. The vast chamber was a hive of activity, with dozens of officers monitoring displays showing starfields, tactical information, and communications. Kyasha stood at the center, reviewing projections with senior staff. She dismissed them as Elias approached, turning her full attention to him and her daughter. "You have had time to consider your position," she stated without preamble. "Has the information provided clarified matters for you?" Elias nodded. "To some extent. Though I still have questions." "Ask them." "Am I the first human to be claimed in this way?" Kyasha's expression remained neutral. "No. It is uncommon, but there are historical precedents during previous periods of both conflict and peace between our peoples. The most recent was over 30 years ago. And what happened to them? Some adapted and found purpose within our society. Others." She paused. "Others found the adjustment more difficult. But the bond cannot be broken once established." Elias absorbed this. "The materials you provided suggest there was peace between our species before. What changed?" Something flickered across Kyasha's face, anger perhaps, or regret. "Politics, resource competition, misunderstanding exacerbated by those who profit from conflict. The usual drivers of war, regardless of species." She stepped closer. "But we are not here to discuss galactic politics, Sergeant Vance. We are here to establish the parameters of your new role." "And what exactly is that role?" The texts describe blood guardians in almost mythological terms. Kyasha nodded. "The tradition is ancient. In practical terms, you will serve as Lyra's primary protector and companion. You will be educated in our ways, our language, our customs. You will have privileges uncommon for your species within our society. And you will have obligations, primarily to Lyra, and by extension to me as her mother and your claimant." Elias glanced down at Lyra, who had remained unusually quiet during the exchange. "And if I fail in these obligations?" "You won't," Kyasha stated with absolute certainty. "You have already demonstrated your commitment to her welfare at great personal cost. The formal claiming merely recognizes what already exists between you." She gestured to a display showing a sector of space unfamiliar to Elias. We are currently en route to our central fleet position. Upon arrival, the claiming ceremony will be conducted formally with witnesses from the highest echelons of our society. It is a great honor, Sergeant Vance, even if you do not yet recognize it as such. And after the ceremony? After? You will begin your new life. Training, education, integration. Lyra's welfare will remain your primary concern, but in time, as you adapt, your role may expand based on your abilities and our needs. Elias took a deep breath. I don't have much choice, do I? We all have choices, Sergeant. I chose to recognize the debt owed to you rather than simply eliminating a potential security risk. You chose to save my daughter rather than follow your orders. We make choices and we live with their consequences. Kyasha's voice carried no judgment, only a statement of fact. Then I choose to cooperate, Elias said finally. For Lyra's sake. And because fighting this would change nothing except to make enemies where I might have allies. For the first time, Kyasha smiled. A slight upward curl of lips that transformed her stern features. Pragmatic. Good. That will serve you well among my people. She turned to Lyra, addressing her in their native language. Whatever she said made the child beam with happiness. Lyra tugged at Elias's hand. We family now. Looking between the child he had risked everything to save and her formidable mother, Elias felt something shift in his understanding of his situation. This wasn't just captivity in a gilded cage. It was something more complex, more nuanced. A new beginning forged from an act of compassion amidst the brutality of war. Yes, he replied, both to Lyra and to Kyasha. We're family now. The following weeks were a blur of preparations for the claiming ceremony. Elias underwent extensive medical examinations, received cultural briefings, and began formal language training with instructors who proved surprisingly patient with his human vocal limitations. Lyra remained his constant companion, her own Terran standard improving daily as they conversed. Kyasha herself was often absent, attending to her military duties, but she met with them regularly to assess progress and answer questions. With each interaction, Elias glimpsed more of the person behind the imperious general, a leader carrying enormous responsibility, a mother fiercely protective of her child, and something else he couldn't quite define. The journey to the fleet central position provided Elias his first view of the true scale of Xyloian military power. Hundreds of vessels, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble escort craft, assembled in precise formation around a space station of staggering proportions. The display of strength made Terran forces seem almost pitiful by comparison, raising disturbing questions about why the war had lasted years rather than weeks. When he raised this question during one of their meetings, Kyasha's response was unexpected. Total victory has never been our objective, she stated. Annihilation of your species would violate our most sacred principles. Regardless of what your propaganda claims, we seek secure access to critical resources and recognition of territorial sovereignty. Nothing more. Then why has the war been so brutal? Her expression darkened. Both sides have elements that benefit from prolonged conflict. And once blood is spilled, restraint becomes difficult. The claiming ceremony itself was scheduled to coincide with the arrival of senior Xyloian dignitaries, including several members of what Elias gathered was a ruling council or high command. The importance attached to the event surprised him, as did the extensive preparations. Why is this receiving so much attention? He asked Lyra during one of their language sessions. Surely a human being claimed isn't that significant. Lyra, whose grasp of complex concepts and Terran standard had improved remarkably, considered her answer carefully. You saved daughter of war leader. High family, important bloodline. Also, first claiming since war began. Symbol, maybe. Symbol of what? Hope. Lyra suggested, the word carrying a questioning inflection. The day before the ceremony, Elias was summoned to Kyasha's private quarters, an area of the ship he had not previously been permitted to enter. The space reflected her personality, austere yet elegant, functional but with touches of what he now recognized as traditional Xyloian artistic elements. Kyasha dismissed her attendants, leaving them alone, a show of trust that wasn't lost on Elias. She wore a less formal uniform than usual, and her posture seemed less rigid. "Tomorrow you will be formally received in my household," she said without preamble. "There are aspects of the ceremony you should understand that may not have been covered in your cultural briefings." Elias nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The claiming establishes bonds beyond the practical arrangement we have discussed. In our tradition, one who saves a child becomes spiritually connected to the entire bloodline. You'll be bound not only to Lyra, but to me as well." Something about the way she emphasized this point made Elias pay particular attention. "What does that mean, exactly?" Kyasha moved to a viewport, gazing out at the assembled fleet. "It means that your status will be unique. Neither subordinate nor equal, but something our language defines more precisely than yours. The closest concept might be honor guardian of the family's future. She turned back to face him. "It also means that certain parties will see you as having influence with me. They will attempt to exploit this perceived connection for political advantage." "Is that perception accurate?" Elias asked carefully. For the first time, Kyasha seemed less than entirely composed. "The bond is real, Sergeant Vance. How it manifests between individuals varies. Between you and Lyra, it has become something akin to what humans might call familial love." From the platform to stand before him, she bore a ceremonial blade that gleamed with an inner light. Taking his right hand, she made a swift, precise cut across his palm, then did the same to her own. Before Elias could react, she pressed their wounds together, their blood mingling as she spoke the final words of the claiming ritual. "Blood to blood, life to life, honor to honor. By ancient right and present need, I claim you, Elias Vance, as guardian to my blood. Your life is bound to our life. Your fate to our fate. Until the stars themselves grow cold." The sensation that shot through Elias at the contact was unlike anything he had experienced. Not pain, not pleasure, but a sudden awareness of connection that transcended physical touch. From the barely perceptible widening of Kyasha's eyes, she felt it too. Something unexpected, even to her. Lyra completed the ritual by placing her small hand atop their joined ones, forming a three-way connection that seemed to hum with unspoken significance. As the final words were spoken, a murmur ran through the assembled dignitaries. Not all of it approving, but all of it acknowledging the binding nature of what had transpired. When they parted, Elias found himself regarded differently by the gathered Xyloians. No longer merely a curiosity or potential threat, he had become something recognized within their cultural framework. Still alien, still other, but now with a defined place in their social order. The reception that followed was a complex dance of politics and protocol. Elias, standing with Lyra at his side and Kyasha nearby, received a parade of officials whose comments ranged from carefully neutral congratulations to thinly veiled assessments of his potential usefulness or threat. One elderly Xyloian, whose elaborate attire marked him as particularly high-ranking, addressed him directly without a translator. "The general has made an unprecedented choice," he said in flawless Terran standard. "Some call it foolish sentimentality. Others see calculation. What do you see, human?" "I see recognition of a truth that transcends our conflict," Elias replied carefully. "That compassion need not stop at species boundaries." The elder studied him with ancient eyes. "Well answered." Before Elias could respond, the elder had moved on, replaced by a younger military officer whose posture radiated barely contained aggression. "This spectacle changes nothing," the officer stated bluntly. "You remain what you are, an enemy combatant granted unusual privileges for political purposes." Lyra tensed beside him, but Elias placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "I remain what I've always been," he corrected mildly. "Someone who tries to do what's right, regardless of orders or expectations." The officer sneered and moved away, but not before Elias caught Kyasha watching the exchange with calculating eyes. He realized she was observing not just his responses, but also the reactions of her people to him. This ceremony was as much a test as it was a ritual. Later, as the formalities wound down, Elias found himself alone with Kyasha in a secluded alcove overlooking the vast expanse of assembled ships. Lyra had been escorted to their quarters by attendants, exhausted by the day's events. "Your people have mixed feelings about this arrangement," Elias observed. Kyasha gave a slight nod. "As would yours, were our positions reversed. Are there others who oppose this strongly enough to act against it?" Her gaze remained fixed on the fleet beyond the viewport. "There are always those who resist change, who see tradition as immutable rather than adaptive. They will watch, wait, look for signs that this claiming was a mistake." Elias considered this. And was it a mistake? For the first time that day, Kyasha's formal demeanor softened slightly. "That remains to be seen, Sergeant Vance. But I do not make decisions lightly, particularly those involving my daughter or my house." She turned to face him fully. "You felt it during the blood joining. Something unexpected. Something that the ritual does not typically evoke." It wasn't a question, but Elias answered anyway. "Yes. Our scientists would call it a neurochemical alignment, a rare compatibility between species whose evolutionary paths diverged billions of years ago on separate worlds. Our traditionalists would call it the will of the ancestors guiding bloodlines together across the void." "And what do you call it?" Elias asked. Kyasha's violet eyes held his for a long moment. "An opportunity, perhaps. Or a complication. As with many things in life, the difference often depends on how we choose to proceed." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Then Kyasha straightened, her formal persona reasserting itself. "Tomorrow your real integration begins. You will start specialized training, education in our ways, introduction to your duties. Lyra's schedule will be adjusted to accommodate your presence. It will not be easy, Sergeant Vance. Many challenges await you." "Elias," he said quietly. "If we're bound by blood now, perhaps we can dispense with military formalities." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "Elias, then. And you may address me as Kyasha in private, though protocol requires formality in public settings." She gestured toward the exit. "Return to your quarters. Rest. Tomorrow begins your new life in earnest." The weeks that followed established a routine that gradually became familiar. Mornings were dedicated to language and cultural instruction. Afternoons focused on physical training adapted to human physiology, but incorporating Xyloian combat techniques. Evenings were spent with Lyra, whose own education had been modified to include time with her blood guardian. Elias found himself adapting more readily than he would have expected. The Xyloian language, while challenging, began to make sense as he recognized patterns and cultural contexts. The physical training provided an outlet for tension and a means to earn respect from the military personnel who still regarded him with suspicion. Most surprising was his growing comfort in Kyasha's presence. Their interactions, while still formal in public, developed a rhythm of mutual respect. She valued his perspective, occasionally seeking his thoughts on human psychology or tactics. He in turn gained insight into her position, the constant balance of military obligation, political pressure, and personal principle. Lyra thrived under the arrangement. Her intelligence and adaptability apparent as she mastered new concepts in both cultures. She moved easily between Xyloian traditions and the human perspectives Elias shared with her, creating a unique synthesis that sometimes startled both adults. "She will be remarkable when she comes of age," Kyasha observed during one of their now regular private meetings. "Perhaps a bridge between our species, if circumstances allow." "Is that what you hope for?" Elias asked. "Peace between Terran and Xyloians?" Kyasha's expression grew distant. "What I hope for and what my position requires are not always aligned, Elias. But yes, I believe continued conflict serves neither species in the long term." It was the most direct statement of her personal views he had yet heard, a rare glimpse behind the general's mask. These moments had become more frequent as their strange relationship evolved, not quite friendship, certainly not romantic, but something unique forged by their shared connection to Lyra and the bond of the claiming ritual. The relative tranquility of their new routine was shattered 3 months after the ceremony when an urgent summons brought Elias to the command center in the middle of the night cycle. He arrived to find Kyasha and her senior staff reviewing tactical displays with grim expressions. "A Terran strike force has launched a surprise attack on our position in the Cryos sector," she informed him without preamble. "Initial reports suggest they targeted our primary research installation." Elias studied the tactical display. The maneuver showed uncharacteristic boldness for Terran forces, striking deep into Xyloian-controlled space with what appeared to be a relatively small but highly specialized fleet. "What was at that installation?" he asked. Kyasha hesitated, exchanging glances with her staff. "Research critical to our war effort, but also non-military projects, including medical research that might have benefited both species." The implication was clear. The Terran had obtained intelligence about the facility and prioritized its destruction regardless of potential shared benefits. Standard military protocol, but suddenly it struck Elias as tragically short-sighted. "There's more," Kyasha continued. "Intelligence suggests the Terran force specifically targeted the facility after receiving information about your presence with us. They believe you provided classified intelligence that enabled this claiming charade. Elias felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "They think I'm a traitor. That this whole arrangement is some sort of defection or espionage." "Yes," Kyasha dismissed her staff with a gesture, leaving them alone in the command center. "Which places us both in a difficult position. Certain factions within my own government will see this attack as vindication of their opposition to your claiming. They will argue that maintaining you in a position close to my family presents an unacceptable security risk." "What do you believe?" Elias asked quietly. Kyasha's violet eyes held his steadily. "I believe that had you intended to betray us, there have been numerous opportunities more effective than this. I believe the timing of this attack is meant to sow precisely this kind of doubt." Relief washed through him. "Thank you for that trust. However," she continued, "perception matters as much as reality in politics. We must address these concerns directly and decisively." Kyasha straightened to her full height, her expression hardening into the military commander once more. "You will participate in our response to this attack. Not as a combatant against your former comrades, but in a role that publicly demonstrates your commitment to your new position while utilizing your unique knowledge of Terran tactics and psychology." Elias absorbed this. "You're asking me to help you counterattack." "I am asking you to help save lives," Kyasha corrected. "To help develop a response that achieves our strategic objectives with minimal casualties on both sides. To show through actions rather than words where your loyalties now lie." The request, or command, placed Elias at a moral crossroads he had hoped to avoid. He had accepted his new life with the Xyloians, had embraced his role as Lyra's guardian, had even developed a complex respect for Kyasha herself. But actively working against Terran forces, against people who had been his comrades. "I need to know exactly what you're asking of me," he said finally. "What this research facility was working on, what your planned response entails, and what my role would be." Kyasha nodded as if she had expected nothing less. She activated a secure terminal and began displaying information that had clearly been restricted even from many of her own officers. What Elias saw in the next hour changed his understanding of the conflict forever. The research facility had indeed housed military projects, but its primary focus had been on a revolutionary medical technology, one that could have addressed genetic vulnerabilities in both species. More disturbingly, intel suggested the Terran High Command had known this and targeted the facility anyway, prioritizing military advantage over potential shared benefits. And then there was the planned Xyloian response. Not the overwhelming retaliatory strike Terran propaganda would have predicted, but a precisely targeted operation to secure remaining research and personnel while establishing a defensive perimeter to prevent further attacks. Your knowledge of Terran tactics could help us minimize casualties, Kyasha explained. Your insight into likely responses could prevent escalation. And your visible participation would send an unmistakable message both to my doubters and to the Terran command. Elias studied the operational plans, mind racing through implications and alternatives. What she proposed wasn't betrayal of his former comrades so much as a genuine attempt to prevent further bloodshed while protecting vital research. "I'll help," he said finally. "But on one condition. If this goes as planned, if we succeed in containing the situation without major casualties, you use that success to open a diplomatic channel. Even a limited one." Kyasha's expression revealed nothing. "You overestimate my political authority, Elias." "I don't think I do," he countered. "You're a respected military leader with direct access to your highest governing body. If anyone can initiate dialogue, it's you." For a long moment, she simply regarded him in silence. Then, surprisingly, she inclined her head slightly. "If circumstances permit, I will advocate for limited diplomatic contact. That is all I can promise." It was enough. Elias straightened, adopting the posture of a soldier reporting for duty. Not a Terran soldier anymore, but not quite Xyloian either. Something new. Something that stood between worlds. "Then let's get to work." The operation unfolded over the next 48 hours with a precision that demonstrated why the Xyloian military was so formidable. Elias worked alongside Kyasha's strategic staff, providing insights that helped anticipate and counter Terran responses. His suggestions led to several tactical adjustments that reduced potential casualties on both sides. Most critically, he identified a weakness in the Terran exit strategy that, if exploited aggressively, would have resulted in the complete destruction of the retreating forces. Instead, he proposed an alternative that allowed the Terran to withdraw with their surviving ships while the Xyloians secured their objectives. Kyasha implemented his recommendation despite objections from several senior officers who saw an opportunity to deliver a devastating blow to Terran forces. Her decision raised eyebrows among the military hierarchy but yielded exactly the outcome Elias had predicted, a successful operation with minimal losses that contained the conflict rather than escalating it. In the aftermath, as they reviewed the operation results in her private command room, Kyasha acknowledged what his contribution had meant. "You saved lives on both sides today," she said. "That will not be forgotten, at least by some." "The diplomatic channel?" Elias pressed. "I've already sent a preliminary communication to the High Council," she confirmed. "The success of this operation gives weight to the argument that alternative approaches deserve consideration." Their eyes met across the tactical display. Mutual respect evident despite the strangeness of their circumstances. Something had shifted between them during the crisis. The theoretical bond established by the claiming ritual had been tested in action and proven substantive. "Lyra asked about you constantly during the operation," Kyasha added, her tone softening. "Her concern for your welfare was touching." "She's an extraordinary child," Elias said. "She sees possibilities that adults miss. Connections where others see only divisions. A trait she shares with her blood guardian, it seems." Kyasha deactivated the tactical display. "Go to her. Reassure her. There will be time later to address the political ramifications of these events." Elias found Lyra waiting anxiously in their quarters, her relief at seeing him apparent in her immediate rush to embrace him. As he recounted a carefully edited version of events, emphasizing the successful protection of important research rather than the military details, he realized how completely this small being had become the center of his new existence. Later that evening, after Lyra had finally fallen asleep, Elias stood at the viewport in their common area, gazing out at the vast fleet and the stars beyond. He thought about the path that had brought him here, from Terran sergeant to Xyloian blood guardian, from enemy combatant to strategic advisor. All because he couldn't leave a child to die in the rubble of a war zone. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Kyasha, still in her formal uniform but without the ceremonial elements she wore in public functions. "May I enter?" she asked, a courtesy she rarely extended. Elias nodded, gesturing her inside. "Lyra's asleep." The excitement wore her out. Kyasha moved to the sleeping chamber's doorway, gazing at her daughter's peaceful form for a long moment before rejoining Elias at the viewport. "The High Council has responded to my communication," she said without preamble. "They have authorized a limited diplomatic initiative, contingent on Terran reciprocation." Elias turned to her, surprised by the speed of the development. "That's unexpected. Today's events provided a powerful argument. An operation informed by your insight resulted in mission success with 34% fewer casualties than projected, and the captured research data confirms that the medical applications could benefit both species significantly." She hesitated, then added, "There's also consideration given to the symbolic importance of your role. A human who chose to protect a Xyloian child, who is integrated into our society while maintaining his core identity. It suggests possibilities previously dismissed as unrealistic. So I'm a political symbol now, as well as a blood guardian?" Elias asked, not entirely comfortable with the idea. "You have been a symbol since the moment you shielded Lyra with your own body," Kyasha replied. "The question has always been what kind of symbol you would become." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "The High Council has requested your presence at their next assembly. They wish to evaluate for themselves this human who has influenced one of their most senior military commanders." The implication was clear. His actions and words would be scrutinized for political significance beyond his personal situation. "What do they expect from me?" "The truth," Kyasha said simply. "Your honest perspective, unfiltered by concern for how it might be received. Your genuine assessment of whether coexistence between our species is possible." "And what do you expect from me?" Elias asked, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how the starlight through the viewport cast her features in a softer light than the harsh illumination of the command center. Kyasha's violet eyes met his directly. "I expect you to be who you have proven yourself to be. A man of principle who sees beyond the boundaries others accept without question. A guardian who protects what matters regardless of species or allegiance." The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the political situation. For a moment, Elias thought she might say more, might acknowledge the unspoken connection that had been growing between them. Instead, she stepped back, resuming her more formal posture. "The council convenes in 3 days. Prepare accordingly." With that, she departed, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts and the sleeping child who had changed everything. The High Council of the Xyloian Empire convened in a chamber that seemed designed to intimidate. Vast in scale with soaring architecture that emphasized the alienness of their civilization, it represented power refined through thousands of years of cultural evolution. Elias, dressed in formal attire that marked his unique status, stood at the center of attention as 9 senior counselors regarded him from elevated positions. Kyasha stood nearby, her formal military regalia augmented with symbols of her bloodline. Her expression revealed nothing, but Elias had learned to read the subtle tension in her posture. Much was at stake here, not just his future, but potentially the direction of the conflict itself. The eldest counselor, whose elaborate garments and silver-blue skin had faded to an almost translucent quality with age, addressed him first. Elias Vance, formerly of the Terran military, now claimed by the house of General Kyasha. "You stand before us as an anomaly, a human integrated into our highest echelons through ancient tradition. This unprecedented situation requires our direct assessment." Elias inclined his head respectfully. "I understand, honored council." "Do you?" another counselor asked, her tone sharp. "Do you truly comprehend the disruption your presence creates? The questions it raises about our most sacred customs?" Before Elias could respond, a third counselor interjected. "Yet these customs exist precisely to accommodate exceptional circumstances. The blood debt is absolute. General Kyasha's claim follows our oldest traditions. Traditions not designed for application to enemy combatants, the second counselor countered. The eldest raised a hand for silence. Elias Vance, we would hear your perspective directly. Do you accept your position as blood guardian to the House of Kyasha freely and without reservation? A loaded question. Elias chose his words carefully. I accepted this position after understanding its significance within your culture. I have embraced my responsibilities to Lyra as her guardian, and I have come to respect General Kyasha as both military leader and head of her house. Diplomatic evasion, the sharp-toned counselor noted. A human trait, it seems. No, Elias corrected firmly. An honest answer to a complex question. The circumstances of my claiming were unusual, but the bond it created is real. I feel it when I protect Lyra. I felt it during the recent operation when I worked to minimize casualties on both sides. This direct reference to his role in the military response caused a stir among the counselors. The eldest leaned forward. You assisted in an operation against your former comrades. How do you reconcile this with your Terran identity? I don't see it as a contradiction, Elias replied. I helped develop a strategy that achieved objectives while preserving lives, Xyloian and Terran. That aligns with the values I've always held, regardless of the uniform I wore. And what of your future loyalties? Another counselor asked. If conflict between our peoples continues, where will your allegiance lie? Elias looked directly at Kyasha before answering. My primary loyalty is to Lyra as her blood guardian, by extension to her house and mother. But I believe my greatest value lies not in choosing sides, but in helping build bridges between our species. The chamber fell silent as the counselors absorbed his words. Finally, the eldest spoke again. General Kyasha has proposed initiating limited diplomatic contact with Terran authorities using your unique position as a starting point. Some among us see potential in this approach. Others see naive idealism at best, treasonous weakness at worst. He fixed Elias with a penetrating gaze. What would you say to those who believe peaceful coexistence between our species is impossible? I would say look at Lyra, Elias answered without hesitation. Look at how she moves between our cultures, absorbing both, creating something new. Look at how I, a human soldier, came to protect a Xyloian child instinctively, against all military logic and training. If these connections can form amid the chaos of war, imagine what might be possible in peace. He took a breath, then continued. I would also say examine the true benefits of continued conflict. The recent attack destroyed research that could have saved lives on both sides. Who truly gains from perpetuating hostility that prevents such cooperation? This last point struck a nerve. Several counselors exchanged glances, and Elias sensed ripples of reaction spreading through the chamber. Kyasha's expression remained impassive, but he caught the slight approval in her eyes. After extensive deliberation, much of it conducted in ancient Xyloian that the translation devices struggled to interpret, the council reached a decision. The eldest counselor announced it with ceremonial gravity. The claim of General Kyasha upon Elias Vance as blood guardian to her house is recognized and sanctioned. His status within our society is confirmed with all rights and obligations therein. Furthermore, the Council authorizes General Kyasha to establish limited diplomatic contact with appropriate Terran authorities, with Elias Vance serving as initial liaison given his unique position. The pronouncement sent visible shockwaves through the observers. Kyasha herself maintained her composure, offering only the formal bow required by protocol. Elias followed her example, recognizing the historical significance of the moment while understanding that implementation would face tremendous challenges from hardliners on both sides. As they departed the council chamber, Elias sensed a shift in the atmosphere around them. Some Xyloians avoided eye contact, clearly disapproving of the decision. Others showed subtle signs of support, or at least curiosity. The political ripples had begun. Kyasha remained silent until they reached a secure area away from observers. There, her formal demeanor relaxed marginally. You spoke well, she said simply. The Council rarely authorizes new initiatives without extensive debate over multiple sessions. Your words had impact. What happens now? Elias asked. Now comes the difficult part. Establishing contact with Terran authorities willing to engage in dialogue rather than simply demanding your return as a deserter. Finding common ground on even minor issues to build credibility for the process. Navigating opposition from war advocates on both sides. She studied him with those penetrating violet eyes. You will face challenges from every direction, Elias. Your former comrades may view you as a traitor. Many of my people will never fully trust you. And there are powerful interests invested in continuing this conflict. But there's a chance, Elias said. A real chance to at least reduce the bloodshed, if not end it entirely. Yes, Kyasha acknowledged. A chance. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to ensure absolute privacy. There is something you should know. The research facility that was attacked. One of its projects involved mapping genetic compatibility between our species. Preliminary findings suggested far greater potential for biological integration than either side has acknowledged publicly. Elias absorbed this, understanding its implications. That's why the claiming ritual had such a strong effect. Why Lyra and I bonded so quickly. We're not as different as we've been led to believe. At a fundamental level, perhaps not, Kyasha agreed. Though culturally, the gaps remain significant. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication. Kyasha activated her command interface, listening intently before turning back to Elias with renewed tension in her posture. Lyra's transport has been attacked en route from her educational facility. One of her guardians is confirmed dead. The others have barricaded themselves in a secure section with Lyra, but they are surrounded. Cold fear gripped Elias. Who's responsible? Unknown. The attackers disabled identification systems. But the timing, immediately following the Council's decision. She didn't need to finish the thought. This was no random attack, but a deliberate strike aimed at the heart of their arrangement. At Lyra herself. I'm going after her, Elias stated. It wasn't a request. Kyasha nodded sharply. We both are. But understand this, if this is internal opposition, my direct involvement could be politically complicated. And if it's a Terran operation, then my presence is equally problematic, Elias finished. I don't care. She's my responsibility. For the first time since he had known her, Kyasha smiled fully. A fierce expression that transformed her stern features. Our responsibility. Come. My personal craft is ready. The journey to Lyra's location was tense, filled with tactical planning and worst-case scenarios. Kyasha summoned only her most trusted officers, those whose loyalty to her personally outweighed any political considerations. Elias was armed for the first time since his claiming with weapons modified for human use but incorporating Xyloian technology. Their arrival at the ambush site revealed a chaotic scene. The transport vessel damaged but intact, surrounded by unmarked assault craft. Initial scans confirmed Lyra was alive but trapped in a rapidly deteriorating situation as atmosphere vented from damaged sections of the transport. Precision strike to isolate the attack force from their support craft, Kyasha ordered. Elias and I will lead the direct extraction team. All units prioritize Lyra's safety above all other considerations. The operation unfolded with the ruthless efficiency Elias had come to expect from Xyloian forces. The attackers, caught by surprise at the rapid response, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. But they fought with the desperation of those who knew failure meant worse than death, suggesting powerful backers. Elias and Kyasha moved as a unit, covering each other with an intuitive coordination that required no verbal communication. They cut through the opposition methodically, driven by shared purpose that transcended any lingering cultural barriers between them. When they reached the secure chamber where Lyra and her surviving guardians had taken refuge, they found the door sealed with emergency protocols that would take precious minutes to override. Through the reinforced viewing panel, Elias could see Lyra huddled with her protectors, the chamber now dangerously cold as life support systems failed. "The override will take too long," Kyasha stated, assessing the control panel. "And cutting through would compromise the remaining structural integrity." Elias studied the door mechanism, recognizing components similar to those he had learned about during his technical training. "There's another way. The emergency manual release can be triggered from inside, but they need to know exactly where to access it." He established visual contact with Lyra, who looked up in visible relief at seeing them. Using the simplified hand signals they had developed during their time hiding in the tunnels, he conveyed instructions for accessing the hidden panel near the floor that contained a manual release. Lyra understood immediately, moving to the location he indicated. Her small fingers worked deftly at the panel, following his gestures until the hidden mechanism released with a pneumatic hiss. The door slid open just enough for Kyasha to force it wider, allowing them to extract Lyra and her protectors before the chamber's integrity failed completely. Lyra threw herself into Elias's arms, shivering from cold and fear, but otherwise unharmed. He held her tightly, relief washing through him, before passing her to Kyasha, who embraced her daughter with uncharacteristic public emotion. The extraction complete, they retreated to Kyasha's command vessel. As they departed, long-range sensors detected incoming Terran military signatures, a response force arriving too late for the initial attack, but potentially complicating their escape. "They're hailing us," the communications officer reported. Kyasha exchanged glances with Elias. "This could be the diplomatic opening we sought, though under far from ideal circumstances. Or it could be a pretense to justify further hostilities," Elias cautioned. "Either way, we need to respond." After a moment's consideration, Kyasha nodded. "Open the channel." Visual and audio. The main display activated to show a Terran command officer whose insignia identified him as Admiral Chun, a name familiar to Elias from his service days. The Admiral's expression shifted from military formality to poorly concealed shock at the sight of Elias standing beside Kyasha with Lyra held protectively between them. "This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Combined Fleet," the officer began, recovering his composure. "We are responding to indications of unauthorized military action in this sector." "This is General Kyasha of the Xyloian Defense Force," Kyasha replied with formal precision. "We have responded to an attack on a civilian transport carrying my daughter. The situation has been resolved." Admiral Chun's eyes fixed on Elias. "Sergeant Vance. Your presence is unexpected. Terran Command has classified you as missing in action, possibly captured or killed." "I wasn't captured, Admiral," Elias responded evenly. "I made a choice to protect an innocent child caught in the crossfire. That choice led to my current position." The Admiral's expression hardened. "A position that appears to involve direct cooperation with enemy forces. A position that involves building bridges rather than destroying them," Elias countered. "Admiral, the Xyloian High Council has just authorized initial diplomatic contact. This situation, regrettable as it is, provides an opportunity to begin that process." Skepticism was evident in the Admiral's response. Convenient timing. A supposed attack followed immediately by a peace overture. Kyasha's voice carried deadly precision. "The attack was on my daughter, Admiral. There is nothing convenient about it. If we wished to create a pretext, we would have chosen a military target, not a child." The logic of this seemed to register with Chun, whose expression shifted subtly. "You're suggesting this attack was carried out by elements opposed to diplomatic contact? On either side?" "It is a possibility that deserves investigation," Kyasha acknowledged. "One that might be conducted jointly as a demonstration of good faith." A long silence followed as Admiral Chun clearly consulted with others off-screen. Finally, he returned his attention to them. "Terran Command is willing to establish a secure communication protocol for preliminary discussions. No commitments beyond information exchange regarding this incident." His gaze shifted to Elias again. "Sergeant Vance's status remains complicated. I understand, Elias said. But I'm where I need to be right now. As the communication ended, Lyra looked up at Elias and then her mother. Her voice was quiet but clear. Beginning of bridge. Elias exchanged glances with Kyasha, seeing in her violet eyes the same complex mix of caution and hope he felt. Yes, he told Lyra. The beginning of a bridge. In the months that followed, progress came in small, fragile increments. The joint investigation into the attack on Lyra's transport revealed a conspiracy involving hardliners from both species, confirming that peace threatened entrenched interests on both sides. Limited diplomatic protocols expanded gradually from information exchange to discussions of prisoner treatment, then to restricted cooperation on non-military scientific research. Elias's role evolved accordingly. His unique position as a human formally integrated into Xyloian society made him both the ideal liaison and a perpetual target for those opposed to rapprochement. Attempts on his life became common enough that Kyasha assigned a permanent security detail, handpicked from her most loyal officers. Lyra continued to thrive, her natural aptitude for languages and cultural adaptation making her increasingly valuable as the diplomatic process expanded. Despite her youth, her perspective often cut through the posturing and positioning that threatened to derail progress. And through it all, the relationship between Elias and Kyasha deepened in ways neither had anticipated. The formal bond established by the claiming ritual evolved into something more personal, more profound. A partnership forged through shared purpose and mutual respect that gradually acknowledged the connection they had both felt since their blood mingled in the ceremony. On the anniversary of Lyra's rescue, Elias stood with Kyasha on an observation platform overlooking a remarkable site, a newly established neutral research facility in orbit around Cryos, staffed by scientists from both species working side by side on projects that could benefit all. 1 year ago, I was certain I would die on this planet, Elias observed. Either at the hands of Xyloian forces or executed as a deserter by my own people. And now? Kyasha asked, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Now I'm helping build something I never thought possible. He looked at her profile, striking against the backdrop of stars. Though I still don't know exactly what to call myself. Not fully Terran anymore. Not really Xyloian either. Perhaps you don't need a category, Kyasha suggested. Perhaps you simply are who you have become. Unique. Defined by your choices rather than your species. Lyra joined them, having completed her session with the cultural exchange team where she served as a living example of integration. At 12 equivalent years, she had grown taller, her silver-blue features maturing toward adolescence. Dr. Parker says the genetic compatibility research is promising, she reported, her Terran standard now flawless. He believes sustainable cross-species medical protocols will be established within a year. Elias smiled at her formal delivery, so like her mother's. That's excellent news. Lyra's expression shifted to something more personal, more vulnerable. He also said something strange. He said that what happened between us, you, me, and Mother, was statistically improbable. That the odds of a human and Xyloian forming the kind of neurological bond we share are astronomically small. The universe is rarely concerned with probability, Kyasha noted, her tone softer than it would have been in public. What exists simply is, regardless of statistical likelihood. Lyra nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and moved to the edge of the platform to observe the facility more closely. Elias and Kyasha remained side by side, watching her. Have you considered what comes next? Kyasha asked quietly. The diplomatic process is established now. Your role as liaison could be filled by others in time. The question carried implications beyond the professional realm. Elias turned to face her directly. My place is here, he said simply. With Lyra. With you. Whatever form that takes. Something shifted in Kyasha's expression, a softening, an acknowledgement of what had been building between them. The Council has formally recognized your contribution to the peace process. Some have suggested your status could be expanded, beyond blood guardian, if that were of interest to you. The carefully chosen words contained a deeply personal proposition, one that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Elias understood the cultural significance, the political implications, and most importantly, the personal meaning behind the suggestion. "I would be honored," he replied, matching her formal tone while letting his eyes convey the deeper response. Lyra rejoined them, having observed the exchange with perceptive eyes. "The bridge grows stronger," she said, taking both their hands in a gesture that linked the three of them physically as they were already bound by circumstance and choice. Together, they stood at the threshold of possibility, not just for themselves, but for their species. A family forged in the crucible of conflict, now pointing toward a future where the boundaries between enemy and ally, alien and familiar, might finally begin to dissolve. Elias thought back to that moment amid the rubble of cryos when instinct had driven him to shield a frightened child with his own body. One act of compassion had altered everything. His life, Lyra's future, and perhaps the course of the war itself. As he stood between the Xyloian general and her daughter, their hands linked in symbolic and literal unity, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The bridge had begun with a single span across the void. Enemy to protector, stranger to guardian, adversary to ally. Now it extended further, toward horizons neither species had dared imagine alone.